Alright, so we're right at the end of January, and this will probably be the last sort of time-themed video that I'll be doing for a while, but I'm really excited to make it because apparently I don't have to look back like decades to be hazy about certain games. Apparently just a year will do, because today I wanted to talk about the Grand Theft Auto Trilogy Definitive Edition. Now, the thing about this is, if you had asked me when did that game come out, I was thinking, oh, it was like 5 or 6 months ago, I think. That's when we got the definitive edition of the GTA trilogy. But no, it came out in like December 2021, I think, and that is over a year ago at this point. So with that in mind, I thought that I would hop back into the world of the GTA trilogy for the first time in the definitive edition form. Now, to be fair, I did briefly play San Andreas during that launch window when it came to Game Pass, but I haven't touched any of the other games in the trilogy so far, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that it was not well received at launch after being plagued by a range of technical issues. But considering this trilogy was released on Steam earlier this month, and at a discount that's still in effect where you can get all 3 games for $29.99 instead of $49.99, I figured now was as good a time as any to go ahead and jump in, and I believe that sale is still in effect through February 2nd if you're thinking about picking it up yourself. And that's what today's video is all about, is just my personal experience revisiting each one of these games and seeing how they hold up, and then secondarily seeing how they play on the deck and whether or not it would actually be worth your hard-earned dollars, whether you're paying full price or catching it on sale. So let's just go ahead and jump right in, starting with Grand Theft Auto 3. GTA 3. I played the original in high school when it first dropped on the PS2 way back in 2001, and I was completely floored by running around a world that was this large and open. Since then I might have tried a version of it on iOS at one point, but as the 2000s and 2010s and now 2020s have rolled on, so too did I, moving on to more modern offerings in the open world chaos genre. Games like Saints Row, Sunset Overdrive, and more recently Sleeping Dogs, to name a few. So jumping back in here to the series' 3D roots was a pretty incredible blast from the past. Obviously this is the simplest and most straightforward of the 3 GTAs in terms of features, but it's still entirely playable and definitely has its charms. Also, this version along with Vice City has some quality of life improvements like GTA 5 style controller layouts, you can now set waypoints on the map, and you have the ability to quickly restart a failed mission instead of having to travel back to its starting point. In GTA 3 you'll play as a small-time criminal Claude who pretty much gets betrayed right out of the gate by his girlfriend on a job. And before long you'll start shedding the small stuff in favor of ever-increasing heights of criminal activity. One of the advantages of being the earliest 3D entry is that it's also the least burdened by trying to do more and more things. And in turn that means it doesn't have to spend as long tutorializing you, so in pretty much no time you'll be making deliveries for the mob, planting car bombs, performing assassinations, and just generally making seedier and seedier friends in Liberty City's criminal underworld. And along the way, more criminal elements will get thrown into the mix, and predictably you'll be caught in the crossfire between the rival organization's interests throughout the city. Now, jumping back into this definitive edition of GTA 3 at once felt familiar and very different thanks to the overhauled visuals. I don't think I really need to go through the entirety of the Grand Theft Auto gameplay loop here, but I do want to talk about the visuals and performance a little bit. Since I played the games in order, GTA 3 ended up being a test bed to mess with the different settings to see what would give me the most pleasant experience on the Steam Deck. By default it sets you to low settings, which kept a reasonably steady frame rate, but no matter what I did, I couldn't seem to hit a solid 60 all the time. And it was the same with locking the frame rate to 30 really, and it seems like no matter what I tried there's always going to be a little bit of a frame dip, but despite all this I still found myself getting pretty lost in the Liberty City experience and having a great time with the game. The moment-to-moment action was never so encumbered by frame rate unevenness as to be distracting, and driving around dodging the police or picking up Luigi's girls was a nice bout of nostalgia to play around with for a few hours. However, what was sort of distracting was the visual overhaul of the game, and really I guess you could say this about all of them, at least initially. On the one hand, this is a much clearer look at Liberty City than anything we could have gotten during the original PS2 or Xbox era. But on the other hand, weirdly it's a much clearer look at Liberty City than anything we could have gotten during the original PS2 or Xbox era. Everything here has been given a facelift, from textures to environmental signage and character models. And for better or worse, this clearer approach to the visuals through things like character model modifications and AI enhanced assets feels a little bit off. Almost like playing a claymation version of the original game, especially considering the animations are pretty much exactly as you remember them, just with more plasticky looking models that honestly do sort of detract from my original memories of Claude and his compatriots. But here's the thing, I'm not exactly Digital Foundry over here, and I don't do any nuanced technical deep dives into graphical performance. I know enough when something looks off, but I can't really give you any in-depth dissection of why certain elements look good while others get butchered thanks to how certain technologies are utilized. However, as a regular player who isn't putting every individual asset under a microscope to sort out its worthiness, I will say this. The distinction made no real difference to me. Sure, I might raise the occasional eyebrow at something that teeters towards the uncanny valley, but for the most part it was kinda nice seeing a really cleaned up version of the game that's 2 decades old at this point. And when you're really focused on the moment-to-moment chaos of GTA's gameplay, a lot of those aesthetics start to kind of blur together anyways and just sort of recede into the background for me. Now I should stress this is just my opinion, and honestly I've never been a purist. If you happen to be a purist and want an experience as close to the original as possible, well there's a good chance these remasters wouldn't appeal to you anyways. But hey, if you're a filthy casual like me or someone who just wants to dive back into a big old pool of open world chaos nostalgia that's admittedly still pretty hilarious, there are definitely worse ways to play GTA 3. But before I get too far ahead of myself, and certainly keeping all of my personal biases in mind, let's check out Vice City. If you're looking to live out your Scarface fantasies, Vice City is just top-notch video game entertainment. Changing scenery from a New York City analog to a Miami stand-in, and coming hot off the heels of 3 just a year later in 2002, Vice City has you stepping into the role of mobster Tommy Vercetti, voiced by the excellent Ray Liotta. After getting released from prison, your boss Sonny aims to squirrel you away to the south. This is so you can quietly set up drug operations, considering the rest of the family doesn't much want to get involved with the drug trade. After hooking up with crooked lawyer Cam Rosenberg, a deal predictably goes south, and so begins your neon-soaked adventure. Vice City builds on everything that 3 brought to the table and makes for a more pleasing GTA experience overall. Vehicle controls are tighter, you can actually dodge out of a car before things go off the rails if needed, the player can now hop on a motorcycle, and there's just a whole range of incremental improvements that add to the experience. Combat and movement controls are mostly the same, but the story takes center stage as an advantage here considering Tommy Vercetti actually speaks unlike Claude. Now if you're looking to have a more roleplay-centric experience, I guess I could see how 3 might be more appealing, but by and large Vice City just feels more complete. Plus I really appreciate that there are fast sports cars literally everywhere in Vice City, which makes quick trips to your next destination an absolute breeze. From a performance standpoint it seemed largely similar to GTA 3, though with its neon color palette by night and pastel cityscape during the day, it certainly has more character than Liberty City. And cruising through that city in motion was reasonably smooth for the most part, and I seemed to encounter less slowdown during moments with more taxing graphical effects like explosions. Also I should point out that most of my playtime in Vice City I stuck with the recommended low graphics settings, which honestly still look pretty good. Not as pretty as if you push everything to ultra settings, but considering I didn't want to play GTA at a soul-crushing 17 frames per second, at this point I'd pretty much surrendered my performance to Rockstar's defaults and honestly was happier for it. If you don't have a fondness for the pop culture and sounds of the 80s, or at least gangster movies in the vein of Casino, Goodfellas, or Scarface, Vice City might not land for you in the same way. But even if you don't, Vice City is still pretty fun to play just to see what colorful character Tony's going to run into next, and just like 3 I had a great time revisiting it and an even harder time putting it down. And finally, leaving the neon cityscape of Vice City behind and rounding out the Definitive Edition trilogy is 2004's infinitely memeable Grand Theft Auto San Andreas.
Oh shit, here we go again.
Taking place in San Andreas in 1992, this was a much bigger game than the prior 2 entries. San Andreas was split between Los Santos, San Fierro, and Las Venturas, with a range of additional regions to explore spanning small rural towns, deserts, and forests, which mix things up quite a bit. You'll be playing as CJ, returning home to Los Santos to attend your mother's funeral after she was murdered in a drive-by. Shortly thereafter, you'll reunite with Sweet, Kendall, Big Smoke, and Ryder, and begin rebuilding the Grove Street family's presence in Los Santos. There are also a few nods to Liberty City in this game, which I thought was a really nice touch. Far and away, San Andreas is the most fully realized of the original 3D trilogy, with a range of additional RPG mechanics and activities on offer. You can customize CJ's physique by going out to eat or spending time in the gym. You can purchase new clothing, accessories, tattoos, haircuts, and jewelry. And beyond customization, there's a lot of new actions that CJ can perform, like swimming, climbing walls, riding bikes, and normal gameplay mechanics like shootouts are implemented much better here. Beyond that, there are tons of minigames and side activities as well, and again, all of this was set against the largest GTA map to date at the time. From a story perspective, you could argue that the characters and the relationships that CJ develops with the rest of the Grove Street family are richer here as well. Don't get me wrong, there's still plenty of Rockstar's trademark tongue-in-cheek humor in the game, but a lot of the characters have moments where they feel a lot more grounded than what we saw in previous offerings. All in all, like Vice City before it, Rockstar took what worked and cranked the volume up even more, resulting in the most fleshed out entry in the series at the time, and naturally I think it's safe to say it's the most approachable and easiest to return to in the present day. So to start wrapping this whole thing up, whether it's the charming simplicity of 3, the synth-pop neon glow of Vice City, or the generally more fleshed out experience of San Andreas, these worlds definitely show their age, but they also continue to shine bright decades after their release. Now, are these games that I would prefer over more modern fare in the open world genre, or even GTA 5? Not necessarily, but occasionally returning to a playthrough certainly has its joys, especially if you prefer a more grounded, less bloated alternative than something like GTA 5. And I think that's why GTA 3, Vice City, San Andreas, and 4 are still my favorite era for GTA. It's not that 5 is bad, and don't get me wrong, I will definitely be looking forward to 6 whenever that finally drops, but the early 2000s GTAs felt like the golden era. Because of the limitations of consoles at the time, it just seemed like Rockstar had to do more with less, and in turn they had to be a lot more discerning about what to include, while also somehow building on the spectacle of each prior entry. And while the Definitive Edition trilogy may not be a perfect substitute for those of us that grew up playing the original games on original hardware for the first time, it's certainly a convenient portal to the best offerings of each, even if it's not a flawless one. Lots of players and media outlets took issue with the technical and graphics problems that were present during the initial launch of the Definitive Edition, and to be fair, their criticisms weren't unfounded. Rain effects could be really distracting and sometimes would even appear during indoor cutscenes. Lots of the AI-enhanced signage littering the world had its charm lost in translation, either artistically or sometimes literally as words were found to be misspelled, issues with the UI and mission text lingering on screen too long, and a whole host of other technical glitches plagued the launch. But to Rockstar's credit, they've released a few patches since then and squashed a lot of the bugs that were plaguing players in those early days of release. Sure, it wasn't a great look out of the gate for a collection calling itself the Definitive Edition, but over time we've at least seen some improvements, and speaking to my own experience so far, I have zero problem with returning to this version of the trilogy, and I expect I will keep returning to it. Because ultimately all three of these games were bombastic system sellers in their heyday and pretty much laid the groundwork for so many open world games that followed in subsequent decades, including later entries in the series. Yes, it's clear looking at the Definitive Edition that some artistic liberties were taken and those character models can certainly look jarring in a robot chicken sort of way, but if you're able to look past that, the Definitive Edition is at least an easily accessible, fairly clean looking way to re-experience some of the forerunners of GTA, and honestly the genre as a whole. So that was my experience returning to the GTA trilogy in a nutshell. Obviously I didn't do any crazy technical deep dives here, but I will say that the default settings were mostly good enough for just returning and having fun for a couple of hours. Now, would I prefer to play all three of these games at a locked 60 FPS with all the graphical bells and whistles? Well, yeah, totally, but ultimately I would say that the experience is more than good enough, even if I probably wouldn't pay full price for it at $49.99. However, I do think if you can find it at a discount like it is right now at $29.99, I think that's a fair price considering the performance that you get for these games. But hey, what about you? Did you spend any time with this version of the GTA trilogy? And if so, what was your play experience like? Were you like me, where you thought that the experience was definitely somewhat hampered, but ultimately still worth your time? Or did you find that those technical shortcomings were just too egregious to justify continued play? I would love to hear your thoughts about it if you could let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for your time and watching videos on this channel. It really means a lot to me. Take care, and I'll see you next time.